The colony world of New Haven was everything humanity had ever dreamed of, building among the stars. It orbited a warm yellow sun in the Kepler 442 system, nearly 90 light-years from Earth. The planet had clean air, rich soil, and oceans filled with life. For 3 generations, humans had worked to transform this distant world into a second home. Nearly 2 million people lived there now, spread across dozens of cities and thousands of farms that stretched across green continents. Admiral Patricia Cole had served in the United Earth Navy for 32 years. She had gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for staying calm when everything around her fell apart. On that particular morning, she stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute, reviewing routine patrol reports from the outer colonies. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that the universe was about to change forever. The first emergency transmission arrived at 08 for 7 hours. Ship time. It came from New Haven's Orbital Defense Station. The voice belonged to a young communications officer named Kevin Torres. His words were rushed, frightened, and broken by static. Unknown fleet entering system. Hundreds of ships. They're not responding to hails. They're heading directly for the planet. Request immediate assistance. Please, someone help us. The message cut off. When the Resolute tried to re-establish contact, there was only silence. Admiral Cole ordered her fleet to maximum speed, but she already knew the truth. New Haven was 19 days away by standard jump routes. Whatever was happening there would be finished long before any help could arrive. All she could do was send reconnaissance drones ahead and wait for the worst. The drones arrived at New Haven 6 hours after the initial distress call. What they recorded would haunt humanity for generations. The Vorthon Collective had come without warning. Their fleet numbered over 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons that human engineers had never seen before. The Vorthon themselves were tall, thin creatures with pale blue skin and forearms. They had been known to humanity for nearly 50 years, but only through distant diplomatic channels. They controlled a region of space far from human territory, and the two species had never had reason for conflict, until now. The Vorthon fleet did not attempt to communicate with New Haven. They did not demand surrender. They did not issue warnings or ultimatums. They simply opened fire. The attack lasted 47 minutes. In that time, the Vorthon reduced every city on the planet to burning rubble. They targeted hospitals, schools, farms, and shelters with equal precision. Their weapons turned buildings into ash and people into memories. The planetary defense grid, designed to repel pirates and small raiding parties, lasted less than 10 minutes against the overwhelming assault. When the Vorthon finished, they did not land troops to occupy the planet. They did not search for survivors. They simply turned their fleet around and left, leaving behind a world of smoke and silence. The reconnaissance drones recorded everything. Every burning city, every collapsed building, every empty street where children had played just hours before. The footage was transmitted back to Earth, where it was reviewed by military officials before being shown to the United Nations Assembly. Chancellor Gregory Palmer watched the recording in a secure conference room beneath the Geneva Administrative Complex. He was 63 years old, a former soldier who had commanded ground forces during the Mars uprising decades ago. He had seen death before. He had made difficult decisions that cost lives, but nothing had prepared him for this. The footage showed the city of Portsmouth, New Haven's capital. 200,000 people had lived there. The Vorthon bombardment had turned it into a crater of melted glass and twisted metal. The drone cameras found no survivors. They found no bodies either. The weapons had been thorough enough to leave nothing behind. Palmer's hands trembled as he watched. Beside him, other officials wept openly or sat in stunned silence. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a long time. The Vorthon ambassador transmitted a message to Earth 3 days after the attack. The ambassador appeared on screen as a tall figure with cold, dark eyes and a voice that showed no emotion. "Your kind spreads like disease across the galaxy," the ambassador said. "You infest worlds that do not belong to you. You consume resources that should remain untouched. The collective has decided to cleanse your species from this region of space. The ambassador paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed its thin face. Surrender your remaining colonies. Withdraw to your home system. Perhaps we will allow you to live there in isolation like the primitive creatures you are. Refuse, and watch your worlds burn one by one. The transmission ended with a set of coordinates. The location of the Vorthon homeworld. It was a taunt, a challenge, an invitation for humanity to try and strike back. The Vorthon believed themselves untouchable. They wanted humanity to know exactly where they lived and to understand that there was nothing humans could do about it, Commander. Lisa Grant was summoned to the Emergency Council that same night. She was 51 years old, with short brown hair and eyes that missed nothing. As head of Earth's Strategic Defense Initiative, she had spent her career preparing for threats that she hoped would never come. Now the worst threat imaginable had arrived, and she carried with her the only possible response. The file she brought to the Council had been classified for 30 years. Previous administrations had created it, reviewed it, and then buried it as deeply as possible. The technology it described was too terrible for any leader to consider using. It was a weapon of absolute last resort, something that should never exist but did anyway. The file was labeled simply, Prometheus Protocol, Grant. It placed the file on the table in front of Chancellor Palmer. "Sir," she said quietly, "I think it's time you read this." Palmer opened the file. As he read, his face went pale. When he finished, he looked up at Grant with eyes that held both horror and something else. Something harder. Something that looked like resolve. "Can we actually do this?" he asked. Grant nodded slowly. "We have 3 devices ready for deployment. They've been maintained in secret for decades, waiting for a situation exactly like this one." Palmer closed the file and stared at the table for a long moment. Around him, the other council members waited in confused silence. They did not yet know what the Prometheus Protocol contained. They did not yet understand what humanity was capable of becoming. 2 million people, Palmer said softly. 2 million of our people, murdered in less than an hour. And they promised to do the same to every human world. He looked up at his advisors, his generals, his scientists. "The Vorthon believe we cannot touch them. They gave us their coordinates because they think we are weak." He stood slowly, his old soldier's instincts taking over, pushing aside the grief and fear. Jokai, summon the full war council. Every admiral, every general, every strategic planner we have. We need to discuss our options. He paused at the door and looked back at Lisa Grant. All of our options. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and it would be fought with weapons that could kill stars. In the weeks that followed the destruction of New Haven, humanity mourned as it had never mourned before. Every city on Earth held memorial services. Every screen showed the names and faces of the dead. 2 million people, gone in less than an hour. Families destroyed. Children who would never grow up. Dreams that would never be fulfilled. The ceremony of names lasted for days. Volunteers from every nation took turns. Reading aloud the name of every person who had died on New Haven, they read through the day and through the night. Their voices carrying across the planet through speakers and screens. Kevin Torres. Maria Santos. Young children whose lives had barely begun. Old grandparents who had traveled to the stars seeking adventure in their final years. Scientists, farmers, teachers, doctors. All of them gone. All of them remembered. Captain Daniel Murray sat alone in his quarters aboard the destroyer Vigilant. Listening to the ceremony through his personal screen, he was 44 years old, with a strong jaw and tired eyes that had once been full of hope. His wife Catherine and his daughter. Emma had lived on New Haven. Catherine had been a teacher at the Portsmouth Primary School. Emma had just turned 7 years old, 3 weeks before the attack. Murray held a photograph in his hands. It showed Catherine and Emma standing in front of their small house on New Haven, smiling at the camera. Emma was holding a stuffed animal, a purple rabbit that she had carried everywhere. The photograph was all he had left of them now. Everything else had been turned to ash. His commanding officer came to his quarters that night and offered him extended leave. "Take as much time as you need," the officer said gently. No one would blame you for stepping back. Murray shook his head slowly. I want to stay. Whatever we do next, whatever response we make, I want to be part of it. His voice was quiet but steady. I need to be part of it. The War Council convened in Geneva 1 week after the attack. The chamber was deep underground, protected by layers of concrete and steel in advanced defensive systems. Around the massive circular table sat the most powerful military and political leaders on Earth. Chancellor Palmer sat at the head. Looking older than he had just days before, Admiral Patricia Cole presented the first option. A conventional military campaign against the Vorthen Collective. Our staff had worked through the night preparing the analysis, and the numbers were grim. The Vorthen control 17 star systems, Cole explained, pointing to a holographic map that floated above the table. They have an estimated fleet strength of over 2,000 warships, plus orbital defense platforms around every inhabited world. To defeat them through conventional means, we would need to fight our way through their territory system by system, planet by planet. She paused, letting the council absorb the information. Estimated timeline for victory, 40 years minimum. Estimated human casualties, between 800 million and 1.2 billion dead. The chamber fell silent. 800 million to 1.2 billion. The numbers were almost impossible to comprehend. It would be the bloodiest conflict in human history, lasting longer than most people in the room would live. We don't have 40 years, Cole continued. Our intelligence suggests the Vorthen are already preparing a second attack. Their target appears to be our colony at Epsilon Eridani. 12 million people. If we commit our forces to a conventional campaign, we won't have enough ships left to defend our other colonies. The Vorthen will burn them one by one, exactly as they promised. Chancellor Palmer nodded grimly. What about defensive options? Can we protect our remaining colonies? Admiral Cole shook her head. Not against a fleet of that size. We would need to concentrate our entire navy at each colony, leaving all the others undefended. The Vorthen would simply attack wherever we aren't. The room descended into argument. Some leaders demanded immediate retaliation. Others called for diplomatic solutions, for attempts to negotiate with the Vorthen. A few suggested abandoning the outer colonies entirely and retreating to the Sol system, where humanity might be able to build enough defenses to survive. Commander, Lisa Grant waited patiently for the arguments to die down. When Chancellor Palmer finally called for order, she stood and activated a new holographic display. The image showed a small metallic sphere, approximately 3 meters in diameter. It looked almost peaceful, harmless even. But the data specifications beside it told a different story. 30 years ago, Grant began, a team of physicists working on advanced stellar research made a discovery. They found a way to destabilize a star. She paused, letting the words sink in. Not damage it. Not weaken it. Destabilize it completely. Cause it to collapse and then explode outward in a nova event that would destroy everything in its system. The room went absolutely still. Every eye was fixed on the small metallic sphere floating in the holographic display. The technology was developed in secret, Grant continued. 3 devices were constructed and then hidden away. Previous administrations decided the weapons were too terrible to ever use, too dangerous to even acknowledge existed. They hoped we would never face a situation desperate enough to need them. She looked around the table at the stunned faces. We are now in that situation. Dr. Catherine Webb, the chief scientific advisor, spoke up. Her voice shook slightly. You're talking about destroying an entire star system, killing billions of beings, wiping out their entire civilization? Grant met her eyes steadily. Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about. The arguments that followed were fierce and emotional. Several council members called the proposal genocide. They said humanity would become no better than the Vorthen themselves. They warned that using such weapons would mark humanity as monsters in the eyes of every other species in the galaxy. Others responded with cold logic. The Vorthen had killed 2 million humans without provocation. They had promised to kill billions more. They had given humanity their home coordinates because they believed nothing could touch them. Using the Prometheus weapons would not just end the threat. It would send a message to every other hostile species in the galaxy. Attack humanity at your own risk. Chancellor Palmer listened to both sides without speaking. When the arguments finally exhausted themselves, he rose slowly to his feet. The room fell silent. "I have spent the last week thinking about nothing else," he said quietly. "I have thought about mercy. I have thought about morality. I have thought about what kind of species we want to be." He paused, his eyes distant. "And I have thought about Catherine Murray, who taught children how to read. I have thought about Emma Murray, who was 7 years old and loved a purple rabbit." His voice hardened. "The Vorthon did not show mercy to our children. They did not consider morality when they burned our cities. They promised to do the same to every human world, and I believe them." He looked around the table. "I will not let that happen. I cannot let that happen. Whatever the cost to our souls, whatever the judgment of history, I will protect our people." Called for a vote. It was not unanimous. Several members refused to support the decision. But the majority was clear. Humanity would strike back. And the Vorthon would learn what happened when they threatened the wrong species. The strike fleet assembled in the shadow of Jupiter, hiding in the massive planet's radiation fields where no enemy sensor could detect them. 12 ships in total, each one crewed by volunteers who understood they might never return home. They carried with them humanity's most terrible weapon and the burden of what they were about to do. Admiral Patricia Cole commanded the mission from the carrier Judgment. The ship was old but reliable, built 30 years ago during the first wave of deep space expansion. Cole had served aboard her as a young lieutenant and had specifically requested her for this mission. She trusted the Judgment the way a soldier trusts a weapon that has never failed. Captain Daniel Murray had transferred to the strike fleet the day after the War Council made its decision. He now commanded the destroyer Vigilant, positioned at the front of the formation where the fighting would be heaviest. His crew of 180 men and women looked to him for leadership, and he gave them calm confidence even when his own heart was filled with grief. The centerpiece of the fleet was a modified heavy cruiser named Silent Fire. She carried the Prometheus device in a specially designed launch bay. Protected by the thickest armor human engineers could create, Captain Nathan Cross commanded the Silent Fire. He was 38 years old, with a quiet voice and steady hands. He knew that his ship would need to get closer to the Vorthon star than any other, and he knew what that meant for his chances of survival. Lieutenant Commander Amy Price served as the fleet's chief engineer. She had spent 3 sleepless weeks integrating the Prometheus device into the Silent Fire systems, checking every connection, testing every circuit. The weapon itself looked unremarkable. A dark metallic sphere, 3 meters across, covered in sensor panels and transmission arrays. Inside it were forces that could murder a sun. Price ran her final diagnostic on the morning of departure. Everything showed green. The device was ready. She reported this to Admiral Cole with a voice that betrayed no emotion. Though her hands shook slightly when she put down her datapad, the journey to Vorthon space would take 19 days through a series of jump points. The fleet traveled in complete communications blackout, running silent, invisible to any sensor that might be searching for them. No transmissions in or out. No active scans. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, carrying death toward an enemy that did not know they were coming. On the 4th day, Ensign Christopher Lane detected a Vorthon patrol. Lane was 23 years old, fresh from the academy, and this was his first real mission. His voice cracked slightly when he reported 3 enemy scout vessels. Bearing directly toward the fleet's position, Admiral Cole remained calm. All ships, cut engines. Drift protocol. Complete thermal shutdown. The fleet went dark. Engines cold. Systems powered down to minimum. The 12 ships hung motionless in the void while the Vorthon patrol passed within 200,000 kilometers. Close enough that their sensors should have detected something, but the patrol was searching for an attacking fleet, not 12 silent shadows hiding among the stars. For 6 hours, no one moved. No one spoke above a whisper. Captain Murray stood on the bridge of the Vigilant, watching the enemy ships on his passive sensors, thinking about his daughter. Emma had loved to watch the stars from the observation deck of New Haven's orbital station. She had asked him once if anyone lived out there among all those distant lights. Probably, he had told her. The universe is very big. The Vorthan patrol moved on. The fleet powered up and continued its journey. On the 8th day, the fleet chaplain, Father Samuel Reeves, held a private service in the Judgment's small chapel. Only a handful of crew members attended. They did not pray for victory. They prayed for forgiveness. "We are about to do something terrible," Father Reeves said softly. "We are about to take billions of lives. We tell ourselves it is necessary. We tell ourselves it is justified. Perhaps it is. But let us not pretend it is anything other than what it is." He looked at the small congregation. "We are about to commit an act of destruction that will haunt humanity forever. We do this to protect our children. We do this because we have no other choice. But let us not forget the weight of what we carry." Amy Price did not attend the service. She sat alone in the launch bay with the Prometheus device, running diagnostics for the 100th time. She had been raised to believe that engineering was about building things, creating things, making the universe a little bit better through human ingenuity. Now she had spent months ensuring that a weapon of absolute destruction would function perfectly. She placed her hand against the cool metal surface of the device. Inside it were mechanisms that would tear apart the fundamental forces holding a star together. Inside, it was the death of a civilization.
Sorry.
She whispered to no one. "I'm so sorry for what we're about to do." On the 12th day, the fleet passed through the final jump point before Vorthon space. They were now deep in enemy territory, surrounded by systems that would destroy them if they were discovered. Admiral Cole called a meeting of all ship captains via tight beam laser communication. "We have one chance at this," she told them. "The Vorthon will detect us the moment we enter their home system. They will respond with everything they have. Our job is to keep the silent fire alive long enough to deploy the weapon." She paused. "Some of us will not survive this mission. Perhaps none of us will. But if we succeed, our families will be safe. Our colonies will be safe. Humanity will survive." Captain Nathan Cross spoke up from the silent fire. "Admiral, my crew and I understand our role. We will get the device to the target. Whatever it costs." Cole nodded slowly. "I know you will, Nathan. I know you will." On the 19th day, the fleet emerged at the edge of the Vorthan home system. Before them blazed a blue giant star, harsh and brilliant, surrounded by 7 planets. 4 of those planets were inhabited. 9 billion Vorthan lived in this system, going about their daily lives. Unaware that death had just arrived at their doorstep, Admiral Cole looked at the tactical display showing the enemy star. In her mind, she saw New Haven burning. She saw 2 million names being read aloud in a ceremony that lasted for days. She saw a 7-year-old girl holding a purple rabbit. "All ships," she said quietly. "Begin attack. Run." The final battle for humanity's future had begun. The Vorthon star burned blue, white against the darkness of space, massive ball of fire that had shone for billions of years. 7 planets circled it in ancient orbits, 4 of them covered with cities and farms, and the lives of 9 billion beings. It was a thriving civilization, old and powerful, convinced of its own superiority over the younger races of the galaxy. Admiral Cole felt the weight of what she was about to do. 9 billion lives. 9 billion individuals with families and hopes and fears. She had spent sleepless nights thinking about this moment, wondering if there was any other way. But the Vorthan had made their intentions clear. They would burn every human world, kill every human child, erase humanity from existence. This was not a war that could be won through conventional means. This was a war for survival. Survival required terrible choices. The Vorthon detected the human fleet within 3 minutes of their arrival. Sensor stations across the system lit up with warnings. Communications channels exploded with urgent messages. The enemy had done what no enemy had ever done before. They had entered the heart of Vorthan space. The Vorthan response was immediate and overwhelming. Over 500 warships began converging on the human position from bases scattered across the system. Orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers and planetary installations. Within minutes, A wall of death was racing toward the 12 small human ships. Admiral Cole watched the tactical display with cold calm. The odds were impossible. 500 against 12? But she had known this from the beginning. Her fleet was not here to win a battle. They were here to deliver a weapon. All ships maintain formation around silent fire, she ordered. We only need to reach deployment range. Nothing else matters. The silent fire sat at the center of the human formation, protected by the other 11 ships arranged in a defensive sphere. Captain Nathan Cross stood on his bridge, watching the Prometheus device through the internal cameras. The weapon remained dormant, waiting for the moment when it would awaken and consume a star. Lieutenant. Commander Amy Price monitored the device from her station. Her screen showed green across every system. The weapon was ready. All they needed was to get close enough. Distance to optimal deployment range, 4 million kilometers, Price reported. Estimated time at current speed, 22 minutes. An eternity, when 500 enemy warships were closing fast, Captain Daniel Murray positioned his destroyer Vigilant at the leading edge of the formation, directly in the path of the incoming Vorthan fleet. His ship would take the first hits. His crew would die first. He had accepted this when he requested this position. Weapons hot, Murray ordered. All batteries prepare to fire on my command. The Vorthan fleet entered weapons range at 0347 hours, ship time. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness like an artificial sunrise. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked between the fleets, explosions blooming in the void. The cruiser Defiance was the first human ship to fall. 3 Vorthon destroyers concentrated their fire on her forward sections, overwhelming her shields in seconds. The ship broke apart in a flash of light, her 200 crew members dying instantly. Admiral Cole did not have time to mourn. She ordered the fleet to close the gap. The frigate Morning Star went next. Then the destroyer Constant. Human ships were dying, but they were buying time. Every minute that passed brought the silent fire closer to its destination. Every human life lost was a sacrifice for the mission. Murray's Vigilant took a direct hit that killed 30 of his crew and left 3 decks venting atmosphere into space. Damage alarms screamed throughout the ship. Fires burned in the engineering section. The main sensors were offline, forcing them to navigate by backup systems. Seal the breaches, Murray commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. Reroute power to forward shields. Keep firing. His weapons officer reported that their main battery was operating at 60% capacity. Their missile tubes were empty. Their point defense systems were overheating. But the Vigilant kept fighting. Keep drawing enemy fire away from the silent fire. On the Bridge of the Judgment, Admiral Cole watched 3 more of her ships die in quick succession. The carrier Resolute, where she had served as a young officer. The destroyer Hammer, commanded by a captain she had known for 20 years. The frigate Swift, crewed by men and women who had volunteered knowing they would not return. A distance to deployment range, 1 million kilometers, Price reported over the fleet channel. 8 minutes. The fleet had lost 7 ships. Only 5 remained, and they were all damaged. The Vorthon fleet commander finally recognized the true threat. Dozens of warships broke off from the main engagement and raced toward the silent fire. They had realized that the small cruiser at the center of the human formation was the key. If they could destroy it, they could end this attack. Captain Cross watched the enemy ships closing on his position. His own weapons were firing constantly, but he did not have the firepower to stop so many attackers. He looked at the Prometheus device on his screens and then at the star blazing beyond his viewport. Engineering, what's our distance? 500,000 kilometers to optimal range. 3 minutes. The enemy would reach them in 2. Cross opened a channel to Admiral Cole. Admiral, we're not going to make optimal range. I'm going to deploy early. Cole's voice came back, strained with the stress of battle. Nathan, early deployment reduces the effectiveness. The weapon might not achieve full destabilization. It's early deployment or no deployment at all. The enemy will reach us before we hit optimal range. There was a long pause. Then Cole's voice returned softer now. Understood, Captain. Do what you have to do. And Nathan, Thank you. Thank you for everything. Cross closed the channel and turned to his crew. 112 men and women who had known from the beginning that this mission was likely one way. They looked back at him with fear and determination, and something that might have been pride. Prepare for deployment, Cross ordered. It has been an honor serving with you all. At 0 hours, the silent fire reached a distance of 400,000 kilometers from the Vorthan star. Close enough. It would have to be close enough. Lieutenant Commander Price, aboard the Judgment, monitored the deployment sequence remotely. Her screen showed the launch bay doors opening, the magnetic cradles releasing, the Prometheus device sliding free of the ship and accelerating toward the star. Under its own power, the device plunged into the corona of the blue giant, surrounded by temperatures that would vaporize any normal material. But this was not normal material. This was humanity's most terrible creation. Designed to survive long enough to do its work, Captain Cross sent a final message to the fleet. Package delivered. See you on the other side. The silent fire never made it out of the system. 12 Vorthon destroyers converged on her position and tore her apart with concentrated fire. Nathan Cross and his 112 crew members died in a flash of light, their sacrifice ensuring that the weapon reached its target. Admiral Cole gave the order to retreat. The 4 surviving human ships, all of them damaged. All of them, bleeding atmosphere and crew, turned and ran for the jump point. Behind them, the Vorthan fleet hesitated, uncertain whether to pursue or defend their homeworld. It no longer mattered. The Prometheus device had activated, and the Vorthan sun had begun to die. The Prometheus device worked exactly as designed. Deep within the corona of the Vorthan star, mechanisms activated that human scientists had hoped would never be used. Energy patterns disrupted the delicate balance that had kept the star burning for billions of years. Forces that should have remained stable began to collapse inward. The first signs appeared within hours. The star began to pulse irregularly, its surface rippling with waves of energy that had no natural explanation. Vorthan scientists detected the changes immediately. They sent urgent warnings to their government, their military, their civilian population. Something was very wrong with their sun. Within 24 hours, the star's core had destabilized completely. The fusion reactions that powered it began to spiral out of control, generating more and more energy with nowhere to go. The star expanded slightly, its outer layers glowing brighter as temperatures climbed beyond anything natural. The Vorthan tried everything. They sent ships to investigate. They attempted to counteract the process with their own technology. They prayed to gods they had not worshipped in centuries. Nothing worked. The Prometheus device had been designed by human engineers who understood exactly how to kill a star, and they had done their job perfectly. At 47 hours and 12 minutes after deployment, the Vorthan star collapsed. Its core compressed in a fraction of a second, triggering a chain reaction that released more energy than the star had produced in its entire existence. The resulting explosion was visible from systems hundreds of light years away. A sudden flash of light that announced the death of a civilization. The nova wave traveled outward at a significant fraction of light speed. It reached the innermost planet in minutes, vaporizing it completely. The second and third planets followed, their atmospheres stripped away, their surfaces melted to slag. The fourth planet, home to the Vorthan capital and over 3 billion beings, was sterilized in less than an hour. By the time the wave finished expanding, every world in the system was dead. Every city, every farm, every shelter, every Vorthon who had lived in their home system was gone, reduced to atoms by the fire of their own sun. 9 billion lives ended in stellar flame. Of the 12 human ships that had entered the Vorthan system, 4 made it back to Earth. The Vigilant was among them. Her hull scorched and pitted, her crew reduced by half, her captain wounded but still standing on his bridge. Admiral Cole's carrier Judgment survived as well, along with 2 frigates that had somehow avoided the worst of the enemy fire. The Silent Fire and her 112 crew members did not return. Captain Nathan Cross and his people had given their lives to deliver the weapon. They were the first casualties of humanity's most terrible victory. When news of the strike reached Earth, the reaction was complex. There was relief that the immediate threat had been eliminated. There was pride that humanity had proven capable of defending itself. But there was also horror at what had been done. 9 billion beings. An entire civilization. Erased from existence in a single act of destruction. Chancellor Palmer addressed Earth in a broadcast watched by every human alive. He did not celebrate. He did not boast of victory. He stood before the camera, looking older than his years. A man who had ordered the deaths of billions and would carry that weight for the rest of his life. "We did not seek this war," he said quietly. "We did not choose to become what we have become. The Vorthan attacked our colony without provocation. They killed 2 million of our people in less than an hour. They promised to do the same to every human world. They gave us a choice between submission and annihilation." He paused, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We chose neither. We chose survival. We chose to protect our children and our future, no matter the cost." He looked directly into the camera, and his eyes were hard despite the weariness. "Let the galaxy understand this. Humanity does not start wars. We do not seek conquest or domination. We want only to live in peace, to explore, to build, to grow. But if you come for our people, if you threaten our children, we will end you. Completely, finally. Without mercy. This is not a threat. It is a promise." The Vorthan Collective was not entirely destroyed. Colonies in distant systems survived, perhaps 300 million individuals scattered across a dozen worlds. But their power was broken forever. They had lost their homeworld, their capital, their central government, and most of their military. They would never threaten another species again. When word of humanity's response spread through the galaxy, reactions varied widely. Some species expressed horror at the willingness to destroy an entire civilization. They warned that humanity had proven itself to be dangerous beyond measure, a species that should be feared and avoided. Other species, particularly those who had suffered under Vorthan aggression over the centuries, sent quiet messages of gratitude. The Vorthan had been bullies on a galactic scale, attacking weaker species with impunity because no one had the strength to stop them. Now someone had stopped them permanently. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Admiral Patricia Cole retired 6 months after the mission. She gave no interviews, wrote no memoirs, made no public statements about what she had done. She simply disappeared to a small house on the coast of New Zealand, where she spent her remaining years watching the ocean and trying to forget the flash of a dying star. Daniel Murray eventually returned to Earth after the Vigilant was decommissioned. He visited New Haven Memorial in Geneva, a massive wall of black stone inscribed with 2 million names. He found his wife's name, and beneath it, his daughter's, Catherine Murray, Emma Murray. He stood there for hours, saying nothing, remembering a little girl who had loved the stars. When he finally left, he walked slowly through the crowds of Geneva, anonymous, alone. He did not know what came next. He did not know if the pain would ever fade. But he knew that other children would grow up because of what he and his crew had done. Other daughters would watch the stars and dream of the future. That had to be worth something. Lieutenant Commander Amy Price received the Medal of Honor for her role in the mission. She accepted the award in a quiet ceremony, said nothing to the assembled dignitaries, and immediately requested transfer to a deep space research station. She spent the rest of her career studying stars. Peaceful stars. Stars that would never be turned into weapons. Sometimes, late at night, she would stand at the observation window and watch the distant lights burning in the darkness. She would think about the Vorthan star, gone now, replaced by an expanding cloud of debris that would eventually form new planets around some future sun. Life would return to that system someday, millions of years from now. New creatures would evolve, build civilizations, look up at their sky and wonder about the universe. They would never know what had happened there. They would never know about the war, the weapon, the sacrifice. They would never know that their son had been born from the death of another. Perhaps that was for the best. Across the galaxy, species that had never heard of Earth began to learn a new lesson. Humans were small. Humans were young. Humans were fragile. They had only been traveling among the stars for a few centuries, barely a heartbeat in cosmic time. But when pushed, humans pushed back. When threatened, humans responded with force beyond anything their size or age would suggest. When their children were murdered, they did not surrender or flee or beg for mercy. They built weapons that could kill stars. And they used them. The galaxy would remember this lesson for a very long time. Humanity had announced itself to the universe, not with words of peace or offers of friendship, but with the death of a son. Some species considered this a warning. Others considered it a promise. All of them understood one simple truth. The stars themselves were not safe from human vengeance, and no one who threatened humanity would ever be safe again.